Sometimes life is messy. Have you ever wished you could refocus your mind, home, relationships, and work life? Join us as we use research-based information to make practical changes and simplify life. This is Life Simplified.
Welcome to Life Simplified. This is Amanda, your host for today. We're going to continue our discussion on bridging the generations and learning some tips on communicating with millennials today. So this particular generation is born between the years of 1981 and 2000, and they're seen as the digital natives, which is shown in, and like we'll talk about here in a little bit, you know, their preferred communication styles. And so I just wanted to see, and I know, but our listeners do not know how many of us are considered millennials. So I know myself, I am a millennial.
I'm a millennial, but I will tell you that for the longest time, because millennials kind of got a bad rap there for a little while, and yes. I argued, I was like, I am not a millennial. I am not a millennial. I am not. We've talked about in a past episode that I'm an elder millennial.
I am also a millennial. This is Tiffany, by the way. I am also an elder millennial, and I identify as a cusper because being right in the transition between Gen X and millennial, I really can identify with both groups. But I am solidly a millennial as well.
And I am a Generation X, so I am not a millennial.
So it'll be good to have your perspective on us today. So be nice.
I'm always nice.
The outsider view.
Oh, goodness. We're going to start off just talking about some just background, general information about millennials. So if you all want to share, if you think it resonates, or if there's something that I left out in some of my research, feel free to just pitch in and let me know. But this was a surprising fact, but then I thought about it. I'm like, not really. But since 2019, millennials are the biggest generation of adults currently. So they're surpassing baby boomers at this time, which makes sense.
It kind of surprises me, though. Like, I guess I just seem like, when you think of a boom, I'm like, oh, there's a ton of them. They're everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
But they're also having babies. So, hey.
Yeah. The millennials or us, are right now the biggest generation. So we grew up during the transition of cell phones to smartphones.
Yep.
Yes.
And so I know previously in our generations, it was more of the emerging of cell phones and the bag phones. And now we're here and we're transitioning to the smartphones with FaceTime and, all the different things that we can do with those.
I was talking to my youngest about these podcasts before we were recording, and she wants a smartphone right now. So we've been talking about phones lately, and I said, well, I really wanted, whenever I was growing up, I really wanted the Razor. That was the phone to have. And she was like, what is that? And then, I'm telling her about texting and how you had to hit the button like 3 times to get the C and all of that. And she just had no idea what I was talking about. So I had to look up this Razor, and I was like, but I never got a Razor. I had a Sliver. And then apparently there's a new one now there's another Razor.
Yes,
I don't know, but she was telling me about it. And
There's another, funny. Yeah, I remember seeing somebody, like a commercial that they were coming back or something like that.
So I vividly remember this transition to the smartphone.
I had a BlackBerry, and that was like big for a little while.
That was a big thing too.
And I loved it because it had like the full keyboard. Now, like, they were like actually buttons, like your phone dialing buttons, but you didn't have to do the like press the same number 3 times to get to a different letter. So I thought my BlackBerry was the best.
I remember those being really cool too.
Well, I was like, full like disclosure, I was an adult and like had a job before I got it. I was like the old school Nokia.
I was going to say, I had the Nokia with the snake game.
Yes, the snake game. And you could like personalize it by changing the faceplate, but it was just a solid piece of plastic.
Yep, yes.
And you trade out colors or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we're into the smartphone age, and we helped with that transition. For communication, it's more interactive. So blogs, wireless video games, social networking, text messaging, we're that social media era. Social media was actually developed by a millennial, Mark Zuckerberg. If I say that correctly, I'm sorry if I
Close
apologize.
enough.
Yeah, it's close enough. But so, he was in our era who actually developed it. We transitioned to streaming. So some things we may remember is the downfall of Blockbuster.
I found my card the other day in an old purse, and I was like, whoa. I felt like I got like in a DeLorean and went back in time for a minute. I'm like, oh, I better get rid of this thing.
I remember in college, early college years, going to Blockbuster and renting a movie and also DVDs and CDs. That was in our time, and we transitioned, like I said, to the streaming aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
We're the generation that's less likely to prefer phone calls. So text, messaging, email is kind of, which makes sense since we transitioned into the smartphones in our era.
It's true. So my husband knows, like, even ordering like a pizza, I will not call. Like, if I cannot get online and order it online, it's just not happening. And I'll be like, you can call and order it and I'll pick it up and I'll do all the things, but I'm not talking to a human now. Like, I'm just not.
Well, sometimes I'm like, I just want to talk to a human, though. Like,
Yeah,
when
but
you're
half the
calling
time it's not even the
lines-
person there. You're talking to
That's
somebody at some
true.
kind of call
No, I
center,
agree.
like 3 states over.
I'm the same way. We have a restaurant that we order takeout that we don't usually do it online, and he'll be like, "Okay, I'll go pick it up if you'll call." And I was like, "Well, we're eating here."
Yeah,
Like, I'm not.
It's not
doing
happening.
So some more background information that I found surprising, and I guess I just didn't really think about it, kind of like the generations, the biggest generation things, is that we're kind of the first generation or entering into that generation to get married later in life and to have kids later in life. And then we are also considered the most educated generation. So I found a fact that by 2020, 4 in 10 millennials in the U.S. earned a bachelor's degree. And so that's what it means by more educated, is we went to school more and achieved more degrees, per se, than any of the previous generations. We are good at accepting change, even though sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that, but that was a fact that was mentioned. We're the curious generation. We value teamwork. We like feedback. And this one was interesting, is we visit public libraries more than other age groups.
I love the library.
So we have
That's
one
funny.
that likes it.
I love it.
I'm like, the online library? I'm not going in. What are you talking about?
We visit them. But I was thinking, like, I take my son to the library to do programs.
That makes sense.
So I don't know if maybe our generation
We're taking
does
our
that
kids
more.
and we're doing, yeah.
I mean, I'll just go by myself, but our library does have a lot of cool things for kids, and area that is just special for them. They've actually just remodeled. So I think that probably would be a reason, because we're taking our kids there. There's a lot of activities for them to do there.
Right, yeah, because before that, I didn't really go to the library. But now that I have my son's 2, he's getting close to 3, so he enjoys going and doing the activity. So
Yeah.
we're tending to shift to do that more. A few events that happened, and there may be more that you all want to add, of course, is 9/11. And I think that resonates with all generations, but it happened within our generation. And then the Afghanistan war was another one. And so the Great Recession of 2007 and 2009. And I thought, and I was reading this article, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense too. It's where, when that happened, no matter what age range you were, whether in college or if you're kind of on the elder millennial, you may have already graduated college, but it has contributed years down the road for millennials to not be able to achieve the same milestones that previous generations have. And that could be, like owning your own house, and that may have played into the education, getting married later, because the recession we were trying, that just hit us hard personally. And so we aren't able to do and meet those milestones the same.
Yeah, and I think too for this generation, we're the most educated for now, which makes sense. But I think we also took on a lot of debt and then didn't see the money in the workforce that helped kind of offset that. So we carried a lot of that debt for a lot longer, which I think also plays into this. And there's that recession there. And then the getting married and having kids later because you're just trying to get things going, and it hit in a different kind of way than I think it did for previous generations financially. But I wouldn't have thought about that as a pivotal event, but it makes perfect sense when you dig into it.
Yeah, and it mentioned in that article too that it's kind of one of the first generations to be worse off economically than your parents were.
Yeah.
We're going to dive into just some ways to better work with or communicate with millennials. And so, of course, I'm sure you're not surprised. Short messages and mostly without personal interaction. And I feel like we've talked about this before, and it may just be amongst us. Like, there's some people who are like, good morning, how's your day today? Or I hope you had a great weekend. And then there's been people that are like, good morning, here's what I need. And so apparently millennials are the get to the point, tell me what I need. I don't need the fluff. I don't know if that relates to you all or if you all are the ones that do the interaction.
No, I
and
get
Jody,
fluffy
if you
sometimes.
Wanna, how do you think about communicating with millennials in that way?
No, I'll be honest here. Okay, so I don't know if this is the cusper in me or the older millennial, but in emails particularly, I feel like I tend to want to lean towards fluff, like, hey, how's it going? Hope you had a great weekend. Like, which is kind of ridiculous because I don't think I talk like that in a normal, like, face-to-face interaction. And just like full disclosure, I had a boss who was more like this, like, thanks, cool, do the thing. And at first I'm like, they don't like me. Like, what? And then I had to come to terms with like, no, like this is just like, get the information there, get the information back that you need and move on because we have too many things going on throughout the day. And so once I realized that, first of all, I just didn't take it personally anymore. And I have kind of adapted where I am more in those like quick sound bites. Like, you know what? No one wants to chat about their weekend on this email. No one is going to think I'm being rude if I'm just like, hey, can you shoot that email to me? That whatever. So I used to be fluffy and I'm trying to be a reformed, more direct email and texter.
I'm terrible with the fluff. I'm like, okay, say good morning and then
move on.
I'm like, okay, what do I need to put in here that doesn't come across as rude? Because I feel like I'm being rude if I'm just like, hey, will you do this? So usually I hope things are going well. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty straight and to the point on a text or an email. A text, even more so. A text, I'm just like, I will just send whatever it is.
Yeah. Where are you at? Very specific.
Chatting apps, so like instant messenger type things, is a good way to communicate. Or texting, of course. That's a good way to chat. They're least likely to prefer in-person communication.
100%.
Yes.
And we've touched on that a little bit. But I also think it may depend on what it is.
It does, for sure.
And in the workplace, if there's like, a huge task or something that you want to make sure someone understands, I prefer personal. But if it's just an easy thing or in my personal life, I'm like, no, I'm good. Just message me.
Yeah. Well, like podcasting, I like to be in person, face to face. That I think we do our best when we are looking at each other and we're in here really being able to bounce ideas off of each other and look at facial expressions. And you guys can't see our facial expressions, but we're typically nodding and kind of laughing and chuckling under our breaths when we're talking to each other.
Well, and I think even if I'm teaching, it's cool to be in person because you can see the nonverbal feedback of whether people are getting it or if it's, if it's making sense or being helpful. But to be honest, like that is just, I need to see you. So in person's great for that. But if I can see you on Zoom or somewhere else, just so I can have that visual to go along with hearing what people are saying to me, I think that that's important too. So it does depend on the circumstances.
Which I think is funny because the next thing that was talking about was like during Zoom meetings or online meetings, millennials will likely turn their camera off and use the chat box.
I think, again, who are you with? Like, if it's this group that's podcasting together, I'm going to leave my camera on. We're going to talk. We're going to chat. If it's a group of 30 people that we're talking about a random general thing, yeah, I might turn that camera off and just give you a little chat. I think it's all relative.
Again, and I think this really is any generation, but just treat them with respect. Don't talk down to them, which I think sometimes happens maybe in the workplace with millennials, just because thinking about, we're used to currently, I think, and I think there's a transition, of course, coming in the next few years of a lot of our coworkers are older than us. And so they're, I've been here longer, I've lived longer, and not thinking about maybe our ideas that we have, because, we have, and it did say, we're the most educated, as in educational institution in knowledge, not wisdom,
right.
Knowledge, but I think maybe that's just something and that may be why that came out in the article that I was looking at. Use language to help them see the visual picture, which I relate to that. I'm a visual learner. And provide rationale for the work you ask them to do, show why it has value.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Like, I don't mind doing it but what is the purpose? Like, are we accomplishing something? Cool, let's do it. But if it's just busy work, it's kind of hard to want to get on board with that.
We've mentioned this in the previous podcast, but in the transition of generations, and I'm interested to see how it progresses. But so we're kind of the first generation. We work to live, not live to work. And we've mentioned that before.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Like, I think we still take pride in our work and we want to do a good job, but I think we also really value family time and personal time and self-care at a whole new level.
So now we're going to dive into those questions. So if you've noticed, it's a pattern. We've all asked the same questions to all of our generations. And so the first one is, what is your preferred method of communication? And so we did a survey of just friends, family. We did a social media, of course, we're millennials, social media survey to kind of see how that played out. And the majority of them were messaging services or in person.
Definitely texting.
I was like, text.
Yeah, and it was all like texting,
Yeah.
Messenger on Facebook, email, all those things we've kind of talked about. But it was just any type of messaging service was the number one preferred. And I thought this was interesting, and I think it depends on what end of the spectrum you're on too for some of these answers. But it was, where do you get information about a new topic? And it was only one or two, not many, said TikTok was where they get information. The majority of people said Google, and someone said reputable sources, which I thought was an interesting answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We appreciate making sure the information is accurate.
Yeah, 100%.
And then, of course, some people said social media, but some of them kind of said more for businesses, which I'm like, I do that too, not thinking about it. If there's like a new business in town or something that I want to check out, I'll look to see if they have a Facebook page, look at the reviews, do my research before actually doing that.
Yeah, and I think actually, and we've sort of talked about this within ourselves before, but I really think Facebook pages for businesses have taken over websites. I automatically will go to a social media platform first to look for information about a new business or restaurant or whatever, as opposed to websites. I think that's just kind of how we're geared now.
And then one was friends, which I thought was... there was only one person, but that was a surprising answer that I didn't really think about. So they go to their friends to find information about new topics.
Well, if you think about it, I think a lot of times millennials will combine social media and friends to get information, because all the time there's people be like, hey, do you have a specialist in this? Who do you see? Or, hey, where did you go to get this? And you constantly see these questions, like looking for recommendations, looking for information, but they're looking like through their social media friends, like their networking group. So they're not necessarily going to a certain reputable site maybe, but they're getting information from other people they know.
Third one was just asking the most defining events in their generation. And so that was, and the responses were 9/11, Columbine shooting, the internet boom, the housing collapse, and student loans, which we've kind of touched on most of these, but those were the highlighted ones.
And 9/11 has been mentioned in several of the generations, but I mean, we still talk about it today in lots of different settings. And I was asking these questions of my oldest, which we'll talk about that in a future episode. And my youngest wanted to answer the questions too. She said, well, what was your event? And I said, I would say 9/11. And she was like, 9/11? And I said, yeah, you learn about 9/11 in school, September 11th. And she was like, you were alive then? And I said, yes, I was alive. I was sitting in my English class at the University of Louisville. I remember where I was. And if we went around this room, we would probably all remember where we were. And those of you listening probably know where you were too. So it's just, I think that was just a big one. And that affected a lot of different generations.
Yeah, I would say it was the biggest event for me because being an elder millennial, a lot of us that are the very first millennials, we were at college for the first time. We just left home. We're just trying to be kind of an adult. And I think that was the first event that I wasn't at home with my parents. And it was scary and you didn't expect it. It was impactful. And it really was a pivotal kind of moment because I can remember like getting my friends and my dorm mates and being like, this is big, y'all. Like, we need to see what's going on because I was the only one awake because it was early in the morning. They were all still sleeping in and I was at work. So that was a big one for the older ones. Now, the younger ones, it may not have been as impactful because it depends on where you were at in the spectrum, how old you were and how much you understood and knew what was going on.
And then the last question, so it was, do you feel like you communicate more effectively or relate to Generation X or Z, which is the ones outside on the cusp? You said some of you're saying cuspers. The majority of millennials said they really relate to Generation X versus Z, and there were a few that said mostly X, but sometimes Z. So it sounds like the majority of the ones that responded were more of the Generation X.
I almost wonder if it depends on where you fall, but also like if you have children, what generation you're sort of raising. Because being a millennial, but closer to Gen X, I do think I communicate and can understand Gen X better, but I'm raising Gen Zs and a Gen Alpha. And so I think when you're raising the other generation, you're like, what are they doing? You're trying to grasp like where they're at and understand that. Whereas if you're a younger millennial, you may be raising the younger like alphas and we don't know as much about that generation yet, and so you may relate more to the Gen Z because that's closer to where you're at. So I think it is all relative on the spectrum where you fall.
Yeah, and the boomers probably thought the same thing about us. What are they doing?
Every generation does. Like no, but I always find it humorous because we wonder that, but then we're like, it's me though, I'm raising them. Like, and I think that for like my mom, like if she thinks that about millennials, I'm like, you raised the millennials, I don't know what to tell you, this is your deal. Like, but I think we do that. We wonder like, what's going on with that generation? Well, you raised them, so I mean, we're all in this together.
It's your fault.
We all have a piece of this.
So I think we've had some good discussion about millennials, just generally trying to understand them a little bit better, their communication style, events that happened in their life that affect the way they are, and we're going to continue that next week with Gen Zs. And so we hope that you tune into that episode. And if you've missed our previous episodes on the other generations, please go back and visit those. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to send us an email or message us, since you now know that we prefer some type of messaging versus...
Check us out on social media.
Yeah, social media. Hit us up. That's probably where we're going to be. But thank you all so much for joining us for Life Simplified.
Thanks for listening to Life Simplified. We are family and consumer sciences agents with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. Contact us at lifesimplifiedpodcast@gmail.com.